Hi, family. Welcome back to this week's episode of the Gold Corner. My name is Joel Ojeda. I'm also known as the Bearded Ref, and I am the creator, not the founder of this channel and this organization called the Gold Corner is my daughter Mia, who passed away in 2018 from neuroblastoma. And she created this legacy and she created this ministry for me to continue. This is the Gold Corner. I tell people we are a broken family, but we're broken together, and we have people from all walks of life, and that have experienced either a loss of a child, the ones that are currently fighting, and the ones that have beat it. So I just wanted to welcome everybody to this week's episode. This is the Gold Corner. Let's do this.
And now it's time for the main event. This is the moment you have all been waiting for. In memory of Mia Ojeda. Dedicated to all the brave little warriors that have fought and the ones that are currently fighting childhood cancer. For the thousands watching around the world, fighting out of the gold corner, it's time!
We have an amazing episode this week. I had the opportunity to meet this mom in from social media, and it just so happened that last week we had Kiki and Tracy McDaniel from Chase to Victory, who host a retreat for bereaved parents, and our next guest, Alicia Ojeda. No relationship. I mean, we actually there's a funny story behind all this as well, and I'll let her tell it. But Alicia was actually one of the parents that was on the February retreat, and then that's how we connected, from Chase to Victory. And they have just an amazing organization and ministry, as you heard last week. If you didn't have a chance to hear that story, you can check back in the episode that we had last week. And this is how we connected. We connected. We started talking. We talked a little bit about it, and I asked her to be part of the show, and she agreed. So I wanted to introduce to you all from Tampa, Florida, Alicia Ojeda. Alicia, I wanted to say thank you so much for agreeing to come on the channel and to be able to talk to us about your Warrior J. Thank you so much for joining us, Alicia. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me. My name's Alicia. I'm from Tampa. I have 4 children. My oldest, George, is a 22. I have a 17-year-old daughter, soon to be 18. Her name is Sakaria, who actually will be graduating next month. I have my son, Jayden, who is my angel. And then I have my youngest is Genevicia, who is 11. Our story started back in 2017. Jayden, like I said, who's my angel. Well, first let me back it up a little bit. Jayden was an amazing soccer player. Began playing soccer at the age of 4. Played competitive at the age of 6. He was the first, one of the only children to be drafted into the U18. So he was the youngest player in our club, in our division. Jayden played, I mean, he was amazing. He traveled everywhere. We have trophies, medals, certificates. When Jayden was in 6th grade, he was one of 2 6th graders that was able to play on his middle school team. I remember when he tried out for the team, they had said that the 6th graders had to earn their stripes. So they had told me, Jay wouldn't play at all because he's a 6th grader. The field is for 7th and 8th graders. Well, my son was one of 2. Like I said, he played competitive for years up until that point. So in 6th grade, I remember, again, so he's playing competitive, Monday through Saturday, and then school league during the week, and then weekend games. I remember our story started March 30th, 2017. Jayden, in the morning, he didn't want to go to school. He was telling me that it wasn't fair that the day before, Sakaria, who at the time was in 8th grade, got to stay home. So that morning, I remember he was arguing with me the whole entire day. He's like, Mom, I'm not going to school. I'm not getting on the bus. I'm not doing this. I'm staying home. And we just argued for about an hour before I had to go to work. So I said, no, Jay, you're going to school. So I need you to remember that part. So he went to school. I went to work. And around 9:15 in the morning, I get a call from the school saying Jay fell. So he's like, the nurse puts him on the phone. He's like, hey, mom. And I said, what's up, Jayden? I'm busy. Like, I'm at work. It's the end of the month. And, before this, I was a Section 8 counselor. So all my files had to be completed by the 30th. And here we are. And he's like, mom, so I was in PE in Coach Bandana's class and I tripped. I said, oh, okay. And he said, well, my leg hurts. Are you bleeding? He said, no, mom. I said, do you have a bruise? He said, no. I said, well, go back to class because I'm really busy. And then he said, okay. And he just hung up the phone. Like, didn't even let me talk back with the nurse or anything. So then around lunchtime, around 1 o'clock, I want to say, maybe 12:30, 1 o'clock, he called. I get a second call. He's like, hey, mom, Jayden. Yes. And he's like, so my leg really hurts. And I'm like, Jayden, you don't even sound like you're in pain, but I'm at work. I'm busy. He's like, can you pick me up? I said, no, sir, I cannot pick you up. And he's like, you don't love me. That was his favorite thing when he was in trouble, or like, you just don't love me. You hate me. And I'm like, no, Jay, I'm really busy. So then he's like, all right, I'll go back to class. Like, but he acted normal, like nothing. It didn't sound like anything out of the ordinary. Around 3:45, again, I get a call while I was in a meeting. And this time my daughter's calling me, she's texting me, the school's calling me, like it was back to back. So I figured something was wrong. So I finally answered the call. And the nurse said, hey, Miss Ojeda, I can't put Jay on the bus because since he had already fallen at school, if he gets on the bus and he falls, it's liability, like you can sue. And I was like, I promise I won't sue. Just put that boy on the bus because by the time I get from work to school, the buses will be there. I'll be sitting in traffic. There's no way. And she's like, Miss Ojeda, you need to come in here. I said, okay. So here I am, like nonchalantly, I turned my computer off. I remember talking to people on my way out the door, like just in no urgency at all. I get to the school. Of course, all the buses are there. There's traffic everywhere. So I pull up into the little grassy area. There's Jayden and my daughter Sakaria, and Jay's in a wheelchair, goofing off. Like, he had really long hair. Like his hair was longer than mine, and it was sweaty. I'm like, this kid was goofing off. Like he's lying. And he's like, Mom, my leg hurts. I'm like, no, it doesn't. You look fine. He gets out of the wheelchair, gets in the car, and I'm like, oh, he's fine. There's nothing wrong with him. And I remember the nurse, and I remember her saying to me, she's like, I feel like something's wrong. She's like, I feel it in my soul. And I'm like, no, he's fine. She's like, no, I something's not right. And she's just, I know Jayden, he's acting different. I said, okay. So we get in the car on our way home. Something in my spirit was like, just take him to the urgent care. So I decided to stop at our local urgent care. Not because I thought something was wrong, but only because I kind of wanted to prove to him there was nothing wrong. So we get in the car. He's like turning around in the back seat, hitting Sakari. I don't know. I always thought he was hit, spitting spitball. She said no. He was doing something to her. But I just remember yelling at him because I was driving. We get to the urgent care. By the time we got there, he kept saying, Mom, I can't walk. I said, Jay, stop playing. Like, to know Jayden is to know that he was a prankster. So the nurse is watching all this. So I'm like, get out of the car, Jay, come on. And he's like, no, Mom, my leg hurts. I'm like, well, I can't carry you. You're big. Like, come on. And so the nurse brings out a wheelchair and I'm like, here we go. He's milking this. We get into the room. So I kind of felt like something maybe at that point there was something wrong, only because he was just like, oh, my leg. Like he was limping. They did x-rays. He was fine. He just started walking again like nothing. The doctor came in the room and he had asked us if he could send Jayden's reports or his x-rays over to the main hospital. So I said, sure, no problem. 3 hours later, the doctor comes back in the room. I mean, this man looked like he just ran a marathon. He's sweating. He's pacing back and forth. And so he's just like, so I just want to talk to you about something. I said, yeah, sure. Like, is his leg broken? Because we were talking about tournaments and you know, how much I paid for this one tournament coming up. I'm like, well, Jay, will he be ready for this? And he just kept saying, well, I don't know. So I heard he left the door cracked and the phone rang. And the head nurse came in and was like, hey, St. Joe's is on the phone. They want to speak to you. So he walks out of the room. Again, he's like sweating and pacing. He gave me so much anxiety because I didn't know what was wrong. And I remember hearing him say, I'm about to tell her. So I thought, oh, okay, well, his leg is broken. Like, that's worst case scenario right now. he comes back in the room and he's telling me that Jay had neoplasma. So I'm trying to like Google these words. So I'm thinking in my mind, it was like him having anemia or something because I didn't know. And I'm like, okay, great. So we can go to the tournament. We're good. Like, what do we need? Does he need like a boot or something? And he's like, no. He's like, do you know what that is? I'm like, no, nothing's pulling up. There's no internet service here. And he's like, your son has cancer. And like, I became so defensive. Like, I was angry. I was like, what is wrong with you? Well, one, I had never heard of any type of cancer except leukemia or breast cancer. Like, those are the only two that you hear about. So I remember just saying to the doctor, I'm like, where did you get your license from? Where did you practice? Where did you go to medical school at? You didn't even take blood work. Like, how can you possibly say that my son has cancer when you just did an x-ray? I'm like, you're wrong. I'm calling his pediatrician. Like, please. And the nurse came in and she put her hands on my shoulders and she said, Mom, this is very serious. Please take Jayden to the hospital or to your pediatrician. I said, no, there's nothing wrong with him. He just went, and this was in March. So he had just went in February for his physical and the doctor told me it was growing pains. She said, something's wrong. I said, okay. So I get home, I called his pediatrician. I'm like, listen, Jay fell. They're saying he has cancer. Like, can you please squeeze me in? She said, yes, of course, come in. So we go in on the 31st of March. And I remember her just saying a lot of urgent cares, they give you worst case scenarios. She's like, they're not equipped to handle stuff like that, which, I mean, why would I think anything different? I said, okay. She's like, what I want to do is send you and schedule you and send you for an MRI. I said, sure, no problem. Took care of it. So I said, okay, his appointment's the following week on a Thursday. She said, okay, no problem. We went, it was a Friday, the weekend was fine. That Sunday, I get a call from the doctor. Now, doctors don't work on Sundays. Not pediatricians in the local, and she called me and was like, hey, I'm looking over Jay's reports and I just really need you to change the MRI to an MRI with contrast. So I said, are you telling me that you also believe there's something wrong? She's like, I mean, it could just be an injury that heals wrong and it looks like it could be cancer. She's just like, please go take care of that. So I said, okay. So I just remember crying and not telling my son, like, how can this happen? Like, all he did was fall. He didn't even break a bone. So that Thursday we went to, it's called USF. It's the local college here, the university. They have a, radiology department there and a whole medical team there. And so we went in there. And if you know Jayden, he cannot sit still. Like, he's my hyper child. He's all over the place. He had to sit in an MRI machine for 2.5 hours. We finish, we get up, we're like, okay, we have another appointment in a couple of hours to see a sports injury doctor. Because again, we're all thinking that this is worst case scenario. It's just an injury. We get in the car, so we're leaving the campus. They called and said, hey, I need you to turn around. I said, okay. And they said, the supervisor wants a couple more images. I said, but why? We were there for 2.5 hours. Like, Jayden can't sit still. Like, he's already in the car, like touching everything and jumping up, So I said, all right. So we turned back around, did another hour. I want to say an hour and 15 minutes. At that point, it rolled into our next appointment. So we drive across Tampa, go to the sports doctor. He's the first doctor to receive Jayden's reports. So we go in there, we're like, okay, yes, he's going to just patch Jay's leg up, whatever. I don't know. Maybe he has a sprain, a fracture. I don't know. The doctor puts me in this room and he's just staring at me, like, just with this blank look. And I'm like, oh, okay, like, what are we going to do now? Like, what's happening? Like, why are you staring at me? You're making me uncomfortable. And he's like, I don't know how to tell you this. I said, okay. And he said, well, there's nothing I can do for you. So I said, oh, perfect. Jay's fine. I'm like, Jayden's great. We get to go home. And he said, no, I'm going to give you a card. And it's to a doctor, a surgeon out in Moffitt. And Moffitt's the cancer hospital for adults. So I said, why are you sending me there? And he looked at the reports and he's like, well, I'd rather not. I'm not trained to, release this information. He's like, this isn't my expertise. I said, no, I need you. You can't just leave me this. Today's Thursday. Like, there's no way. I need you to tell me what's going on. And he said, your son has cancer. And he said he has a form of sarcoma. It looks like it could be Ewing's. It could be osteo. He's like, I don't know. Like, this is not my field. So I said, okay. I'm crying. They had to move me from the main room to the back waiting room because I was just crying like that. just that deep cry, because it's like he fell and he was an active soccer player. Like, this is my athletic child. So that Friday, I called Dr. Benidier, an amazing doctor. I absolutely love him. He did so much for Jay. And he said, okay, come in. We want to talk with your family. We'll go over everything. He's like, I'll break it down for you. But I want to meet your son. I said, okay. So that Monday, the 10th, we go in. We're in April now, so it's April 10th. We go in. I'm sitting down. I met him. His whole team was there. Nurse Leila was the head nurse, and a couple other residents. So they said, okay, so he's showing me like the x-ray and what Jay's bone looked like. And again, I don't know, like I have no idea what's going on. And he's like, it could be, best case scenario, an infection of the bone. He said, or it could be cancer. He's like, let's do the biopsy on April 11th over at Johns Hopkins All Children's, and we'll go from there. He's like, just don't Google anything. Don't panic, because that's the worst thing you're going to do. And the only thing that my son cared about, and he's crying like I had never heard my son cry like that. He was just crying because in his mind, he could never play soccer again. Soccer was his life. So for a 12-year-old child who never experienced anything, and it's kind of like, well, you can't play soccer right now. That's all he kept hearing. You can't play soccer. He didn't care about, if it was cancer or any surgery or biopsy or anything. He just heard cancer. So I said, no, it's Jayden, we're fine. So April 11th, we get up, we drive all the way to St. Pete, Florida. At 6:30 a.m., I remember walking through the doors, and again, a scary place. This huge hospital. It's an all children's hospital. I'm seeing all these different things going on, different kids, different families. We get checked into the weight room, the surgery department. We're sitting there. They call us back. Again, the whole team comes out, the anesthesiologist, Dr. B's there, his team. I'm just nonchalantly like, oh, okay, we're going to get out of here. It's going to be fine. No big deal. No. So they took Jay back. They paid. So all the families got like a little pager almost. So when your child is out of surgery, you get paged, you go back. So I walked back into the room. I remember it was a circle table and it had 4 chairs. And I was by myself. No family, no friends, nobody. Again, I'm thinking this is, just an infection. He was going to get some antibiotics and we were going to go home. So I'm sitting in this room. Dr. Benidier walks in with one of his residents, who was a guy, and mind you, they're both huge. They're like 6 something, and here I am. I'm only 5'1". I'm sitting down, and they're just sitting there, and he's just looking at me. This man that I met less than 24 hours is just sitting there, and he has this look on his face, and I can tell something's wrong. And so he's trying to explain to me, but in my mind, all I kept hearing is, "Oh, he has an infection. We're fine. Antibiotics. We're leaving. When can I leave?" And he like grabs my arm and he's like, "Mom, do you have anybody here with you?" And I said, "No, why?" And he's like, "Did you hear anything I said?" And I said, "Yeah, Jay has an infection." He said, "You're not listening to me." And it was almost like it was just, my mind was going so fast. And he said, "Jayden has osteosarcoma." And I just remember losing it. Like I just started crying, like to the point where I couldn't breathe. And he didn't, like, he gave me like a side hug because we had just met the night. Like, he's like, "Do I give you a hug?" And I'm like, "Oh," and I'm just crying. So he's like, that awkward, doctor, like, "I don't know this family. Like, this mom's really losing it." So they both leave the room and I'm just crying and crying and crying. And I remember, and I'll never forget, I called my ex-husband at the time. I called him first and he didn't know what to say. He was just like, wow, like, I have no words. The next person, I called 5 people. I called my mom. And I remember her saying, "I'm really busy. I'm at work. Can we talk about this later?" I said, "Okay." Called my dad. He was just like, "Oh," like no emotion. I said, "Okay." And I called my sister and brother because I have a small family. They didn't know what to say. I said, "Okay." So I called one of my soccer mom friends. Me and her were very close. Jayden and her son had played at that point, I want to say 4 years together, 5 years. And I just remember she was the only person that would give me the time just to say, like, my son was diagnosed with cancer. Like, I'm crying. Like, I don't know what to do. So I let it out. I was like, "Okay, I'm fine." I walked out of the room, walked back to the front, gave them back the pager. And they said when Jay wakes up from his anesthesiology, anesthesia, what am I talking about? From his anesthesia, we'll come get you. So I said, okay. So I remember walking through the doors and then I look over to the right and this little baby, she must have been about 2. She came running over to me like if she knew me and she went to hug me. And I just remember just crying, like I was hysterical. Like I remember just like almost like blacking out, and I just fell. And the nurses came running out because there was a camera there and they could see. And like the girl's mom thought like I tripped over her because she was like, oh my gosh, what happened? And I just remember just saying like, my son has cancer. And that mom started crying. And then the nurse started crying. So they brought me back again because now I'm like uncontrollable. Like it just, the crying could not stop. So the nurse, one of the head nurses came back out and she said, I had the honor of taking care of your son. She's like, he's a good kid. And I said, thank you. And she said, God has a plan for him and a purpose. And at that point, I'm like, he just was diagnosed with cancer. No, I don't want to hear it right now. And she's like, let me walk you back. And she's like, you got this. You're going to tell Jay. And I said, I'm not telling my son, my 12-year-old, that he can't play soccer. So his surgeon was there. And I said, Dr. B, please just tell Jayden. And he said, okay. And he explained it to Jayden about what was going to come, you know, all the different types of chemos he would go through and everything that was going to happen, kind of like in a short version. And I just remember Jayden crying and saying, you know, Mom, I'll never play soccer again. Like he didn't care about his leg. He didn't care about, you know, the surgery, the tumor. He just said, I can't play soccer. And I just remember just crying. Like, how do you look at your child and say you have cancer? And his lifelong dream was soccer. And I know to some people, it just sounds so, it's ridiculous. A 12-year-old has, but he had his whole future planned in his mind. Like he knew this is what he was going to do. This is where he was going to go to college. This is what he wanted to be a ref. He wanted to play pro. I mean, he had everything basically lined up for him. So I remember we left and then he told his siblings. I didn't tell them because I just couldn't talk about it. I remember, I actually don't remember how I told my daughter, but we were just talking about it on our Facebook Live. And apparently I was driving her to school one morning. Again, she's in 8th grade. And I was like, so by the way, I don't know how to explain this, but your brother has cancer and we're going to spend the next 10 months doing treatment and I won't be home because I'll be in the hospital. So I love you. Have a good day. And we talked about it. But in my mind, I was like, I couldn't talk about it, but she was like, Mom, like, what is wrong with you? Why would you just throw that at me? So anyway, the following week, I mean, everything just happened so quickly. After his diagnosis again was April 11th, 2017. It just happened so fast. We had scans, we had the port put in. He started his first round of chemo April 21st. Again, that was hard. They put the port in and they put us straight up onto 7 South, which is the cancer floor. And I just remember as soon as we walked in from surgery and walked into the cancer floor, I just remember seeing a little girl on a tricycle with no hair, with her pole. And I said, I can't do this. And again, I broke down and Jayden's crying. I'm crying. I'm like, I can't. And I remember the 2 nighttime nurses came in. And I'll never forget I'm watching all of this happen slowly. They're gowned up. They have gloves on. Masks on and everything. And I just remember them saying, you cannot touch his chemo, like at all. Like if God forbid something happens, you cannot touch this. You can get sick and die. I was like, oh my gosh, but you're pumping this through my son. And so he, like I said, he started in April and that was rough. Everything happened so fast. He did 10 rounds of chemo. After the 10th round, he underwent what's called a limb salvage surgery on June 30th, 2017. Basically, Dr. Benedier came back in, took the tumor out of his leg, and instead of putting a metal piece in his leg, they put a cadaver bone in his leg, which actually the day before surgery, that's when they found the cadaver bone. He wasn't going to have anything. I didn't want his leg amputated, but they said because I'm short and his dad is short, like he wasn't going to grow. So putting a metal rod in his leg wasn't really going to benefit Jay because he didn't foresee us being, a tall family. So luckily the day before they found this bone, put in his leg, he was fine. He had a brace in and we spent a couple more days at the hospital. I want to say 10. Send us home. We go home. We spent about 2 or 3 weeks before having chemo. Again, still going to clinic appointments, getting blood transfusions. And I remember he started chemo back up in July. And one day after we came home, after a week at the hospital, I remember cleaning his incision on his leg. And it wasn't that big. It was just in his tibia area. So I'm looking at his leg. I said, I can see through your leg. And he said, what do you mean? I said, I can see your bone in your leg. Oh my gosh, I'm going to pass out. Let me call this doctor. So I called Dr. Beniti again, and I remember saying, "Hey, Dr. B, how are you?" He said, "Good." He's like, "What's going on, Mrs. Ojeda?" And I said, "So I'm looking through Jay's leg," and he's like, "That's impossible." I'm like, "No, I'm looking at this bone, and I could see it almost looked like a window screen." And he said, "Oh my gosh, Jayden's leg fell apart. You need to bring him into the ER right now. We have to do emergency surgery." So here I am. I'm like, "Jayden, don't panic." He said, "What, Mom?" I'm like, "Don't move." I'm like, "But I'm going to have to lift you into the wheelchair. Let's put your brace on." And he was like, "Mom, what's wrong?" I'm like, "Your leg fell apart. Your whole incision. Just don't move because your bone could pop out." And he's like panicking. That's the worst thing to tell Jayden, like, because he's like me. So here we go. We're back in St. Pete. The doctor closes his leg up and he said, "Well, I have some more bad news for you." I said, "Okay." He said, "Well, Jayden needs what's called a muscle flap. He needs to see the plastic surgeon team, and they need to do a muscle flap, which is basically just taking the flap over." So, okay. And he said, "But Jayden's really thin. He lost so much weight. We're going to have to graft it from his thigh." I'm like, "Oh my gosh." So about a week later, I want to say August 16, 2017, we were back in the hospital again. He had his whole plastic surgery, everything, the skin graft went well. So instead of having a little incision by his tibia, now the incision extended all the way down to his ankle. So that was fun. So that he was in a brace even longer. Actually, he was in his brace the entire time. Most kids with osteosarcoma, they'll be in a brace a couple months and then they're fine and then they're able to walk. Well, Jayden didn't have that opportunity. But so back to the surgery. Started chemo again, did a couple more rounds, called Dr. B and the plastic surgeon, Dr. Rockers, and I remember saying, "So I'm looking at Jay's leg again, but this time it's open towards the bottom." And they're like, "No." And I'm like, no, like his leg is slowly opening as I'm sitting here in the room watching him. He said, "Oh my gosh." He ended up having to have another plastic surgery. This time they ended up putting a wound back on his leg. So he had to carry this machine around in a wheelchair with, blood everywhere. So that was definitely something. He had a weak stomach. He couldn't handle it. So that pushed chemo back even longer. He was supposed to finish in December. Definitely did not finish in December. He just kept getting sick, and the chemo just kept making him lose so much weight. I want to say he lost almost 30 pounds, and he was just so tiny. And this is a kid that was athletic build, muscle. His thighs were huge, and he just became so tiny. And then so finally, once they put the wound back, that healed it a little bit. He was able, he had to have a lot of protein, so he was able to close a little bit. So he finally finished his last cycle of chemo. So we did 26 cycles, 6 rounds, completing January 21st, 2018. He rang the bell February 5th, 2018. I'm sorry. He had scans February 5th, after his post-treatment scans on February 5th. And that's when we found out he was NED. They said there was no cancer anywhere in his body. His leg was fine. I mean, granted, he still had like holes in his leg that just had to heal on its own, but he was fine. They took the port out in March, and he started back in school at the beginning of April. Back to Pierce Middle School, back to where he started. Again, loving it. All the girls loved Jayden. I mean, he had really long hair, so at this point he had like a buzz cut. So all the girls, I mean, the girls he was a ladies' man. That's one thing I'll give him. He would come, I would pick him up an hour before school let out, and he would have like 3 girls wheeling him to the front, one holding his book bag, one holding, like his hand to make sure it was okay, one in the wheelchair. So that school, yeah, they had a lot of patience with us. They loved our family. I was about to go back to work. Life was great again. Scans were fine. But I waited a little bit. I said, let me just wait just to make sure, just to see how he's, handling school and everything. Because on top of all this, he lost his hearing. So he had hearing aids, and he had a Bluetooth speaker for his hearing aids. And I just remember getting called from the school, like, "So Jayden's hacking into people's phones." I'm like, oh my gosh. Like, he was always pranking everyone. But again, he wasn't in trouble. They just loved him. So in May, Mother's Day week, we go for his 3-month scans on May 9th. And again, bone density scan, MRI, CT scan, x-rays, things that Jay can't sit still for. So we're in the hospital like, what possibly should have been like 3 or 4 hours. It was taking us 8 to 10 hours because he just couldn't sit still. The next day, I'm driving Jayden to school. Everything's fine. I'm expecting like, great, everything's good. I had his main oncologist called me, Dr. Shaw, and I remember being in the car. We're driving him to school. He's on speaker. Again, I mean, he sounded like everything was fine. He's like, hi, Mrs. Ojeda, how's everything? Any plans for the weekend? I said, no, I mean, it's Mother's Day, you know, just talking. I'm like, he's like, so I need to talk to you about something. I'm like, oh, his scans. See, how are they? Perfect. Great. You know, this is perfect. He said, unfortunately, I have some bad news. Jayden has relapsed into his lungs. We found 3 nodules in his left lung. Said, oh man. Okay. I had to pull over. I couldn't drive. I just remember crying. And Jay was in the car and he said, are you going to tell your son? I said, well, he's on speaker and he heard all of this. So he's crying. I'm crying. I said, okay. So his middle school was actually like 2 minutes from where we were. So I said, let me go in there. Let me pull in. Just tell them that I have to withdraw you. We're back on the fight. So we go in there. His assistant principal and the nurse, the nurse that had found, who thought something was wrong, was there. And I just walked in crying and they knew. They pulled me into the office and I said, Jay relapsed. And I remember them both crying. I remember Miss Sylvia crying and Miss LeClaire crying. And we all just sat there crying with Jayden. And I'm like, I can't do this. Like, this is the hardest thing as a mom. We just did 10 full months of this. And in between, besides chemo, we're going to, physical therapy, we're doing clinic appointments. Jayden was a type with osteosarcoma. A lot of kids do not get a lot of transfusions. Jay was getting platelets and blood almost every day, like 2 to 3 bags at a time. So we were literally at the hospital every day. So I remember this is May of 2018. We started, I want to say May 22nd. It's the day after my daughter's birthday. We're back in the hospital. Just we're back at it again. I mean, the chemos were a little different. They were a little harsher. So the way it was set up, instead of 4 weeks on, 1 week off, it was 1 full week on, 3 weeks off. But in the meantime, every other day at the clinic, because Jay was so sick. And sometimes our week stays would end up 2 week stays because his platelets wouldn't go up. His ANC definitely was at a 0 for the majority of his journey. So we did... May, June, he did 2 cycles. July, we did our 3rd cycle. And then he underwent what's called a thoracotomy. They spread his ribs. They cut some of the lobe on his lower left lobe, removed the 3 tumors, and then they said that they were going to send them off. I get the results back from pathology saying that the cancer, or the chemo actually didn't even touch Jayden's nodules. Like, one of them actually grew, one of them was unchanged, and one shrunk by barely a millimeter. So at that point, Jayden, he decided that he no longer wanted to do treatment. Well, in the state of Florida, when you're 12, you don't have to do treatment. Well, guess who wasn't having it? Me. I said, no, he's 12. Like, I'm his mother. We're going to continue. He has 3 left. That's it. And he said, no, I'm not doing it. I said, okay. So they brought in a whole team. They brought in palliative, they brought in a psychologist, they brought in a social worker, they brought in everybody that could possibly speak to me, the chaplain, everybody. And I'm like, no, we're doing this. And I don't care what anyone says. If I have to push the chemo myself, I'm doing it. And they were like, no. I'm like, no, this is happening. Like, we're not just going to stop treatment now. Like, no. So we actually, I bargained with Jay. I had to bargain with my 12, 13-year-old. Like, okay, Jay, you do this. And then we'll get your scans pushed up. So he said, fine, Mom. I'm like, Jay, and he's a mama's voice. I was like, I'm going to be disappointed if you don't. He said, okay, Mom, please no. So he had his 4th cycle, had his scans right after, and his scans showed there was no more nodules in his lungs. So they were clear. So he's like, okay, I'll agree. I'll do the last 2 cycles because these were really potent chemos. I mean, he was sick. Like, it was really bad. Nothing like the first go round. So, finished chemo November 6, 2018, rang the bell. Everything was great. However, the week before, we were at another retreat, a local retreat similar to Lighthouse, for families with kids on active treatment. And while he was there, he fell. I remember it was Halloween weekend and he fell. And I just remember everyone panicking because with Jayden, since he had a brace in his left leg and he wasn't supposed to be walking, he taught himself how to walk. He should have been in a wheelchair. he was playing Nine Square. I think it was called Nine Square, and he jumped and fell. And I remember just wanting to kill everyone. I'm like, well, why is Jayden playing? And he's like, Mom, I forgot I had a brace on my leg. I'm like, Jayden, I'm like, who said you can play? And they're like, his father, because we were all there. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And he's like, it's my right leg. So I said, okay, no problem. I'm like, I'm not worried about the right leg. It's fine. Your left leg is intact. There's no bruises. There's no bleeding. Again, any injury to his left leg after surgery would have caused an amputation. That was my biggest thing. I know it's superficial, but for me, I'm like, no, Jay's going to be out on that soccer field again. So again, rang the bell November 6th. A week later, I remember him saying, Mom, my cancer's back. I'm like, no, that's impossible. Like, we just had scans in October. Like, you're fine. And he said, no, Mom, my cancer's back. I feel it. I said, no, you're wrong. So I called anyway. And I said, well, since we have a transfusion appointment, can we just do an x-ray? So they said, okay. I remember 3 hours went by. We were sitting in the hospital, and he's getting his transfusion, like I said. And I just remember Dr. Shaw coming out, and I'm like, hey, we're on the same floor. I haven't heard from you all day. Like, what's going on? Like, what did they lose Jay's report? And he said, oh, no, I've been meaning to tell you. I just sent over the report to Moffitt. And I said, well, for what? And he said, well, there was some discrepancy. Something was showing up. And I just couldn't see. I don't know. And he was like making all these excuses. And I'm like, but you do know it was the right leg. And he said, yeah. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? He's like, well, let's just not get ahead of ourselves. But I think Jay's cancer came back. I'm like, what? And he said, I just remember like just being in shock, like, what? No, this is a lie. And I remember on my oldest son's birthday, November 22nd, they called me, and the head nurse from Johns Hopkins called me and said, listen, we found 4 nodules on Jay's right side. We found it in the tibia, the femur, the sacrum, and his clavicle. And I just remember just sitting there like, but osteosarcoma doesn't do that. Most kids with osteosarcoma keep relapsing in their lungs, and they end up passing because there's only so much lung you can cut before, but with Jay, it just traveled to the right side. So I was like, no, this is ridiculous. I said, I want an appointment. I want to talk to Dr. Shaw myself. I want to see the report. This is wrong. And I remember Jay just saying, Mom, I'm going to die. I said, Jay, no, we're not there yet. Like, no, what are you talking about? Like, you just finished treatment. They don't know what they're doing, everything. They don't know what they're doing. I don't know where they went to school. Like, I could look at the report and tell you you're fine. And he's like, okay, Mom. So he asked his older siblings to come. So it was my older son, my older daughter, Jayden, and myself. And we were sitting in this room, like a normal clinic appointment, in the same room that we'd always sit in. And I remember Dr. Shaw came in with the head nurse. I already knew something was wrong because they never come in twos. Always Dr. Shaw would come by himself, or the nurse would come by herself, or whatever. And I remember him sitting down and crossing his legs. And he just like kind of looks lost almost. And this isn't the same doctor that we had it's the same doctor, but different personality. Like, this is someone who would come in the room, and him and Jay would talk soccer. They would talk about Messi and this player and the Rowdies and every soccer team. And I used to be like, oh my gosh, I just want to leave here. Like, and he came in almost just blank. Like, he didn't know how to tell me this. And he said, Mrs. Ojeda, we're at a point in this journey that I can be honest with you. Again, I'm thinking Jay has a sprain. I'm really not thinking that the tumors are really there, because I'm like, she doesn't know what she's talking about. And he said, well, Jay's cancer spread. And at this point, he's like, there are no options. And Jayden said, Dr. Shaw, what are my chances, my survival rate? And he said, I'm not going to tell you, Jay. And he's like, no, I want to know. He's like, well, it's 0. You're going to die. And I remember when he said it like that, I was so taken back. And Jayden looked at me. And I remember my older son, and he's very, like, he doesn't show emotion. Like, he's not the type to cry. And I remember putting his head down, and he walks out the room. And I just sat there looking at Jayden crying. I'm like, you can't just tell me a kid who just went through 10 months of treatment, then another 7 months of treatment is going to die. I'm like, no. And he's like, I'm going to leave you some tissue. Just talk about it with your family, and then I'll be back. I'm like, what is there to talk about? You just told me my son's going to die. Like, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Like, no, we have to keep fighting. And he let me stay in the room for about an hour, and he came back. And he's like, I just want you to go make memories. I'm like, I don't want to make memories. I want treatment. Like, I want trials. I want to go second, third, fourth opinions. I'm like, he's like, no, there's no other option. I'm like, but you're not his, mom or dad. Like, you can't tell me. He's like, but I'm telling you. So it was at that point where we kind of just fell off. Like, our relationship wasn't the same anymore because I needed someone to fight with me, not against me. And at that point, if I wanted to make memories, then I would say, okay, we're ready just to make memories and give up. I wasn't there yet. So December, that weekend, I think it was the 8th, 9th, and 10th, the local Children's Cancer Center, they sent us to Jay's favorite beach, Madeira Beach here in St. Pete. We spent the weekend with Jayden's little friend, his little girlfriend. It was his best friend. She came with us, and then another close friend, Kaylin, and just me and my kids, and the four of us plus them. And we just sat there, I don't want to say making memories, but we just cried, and we had a barbecue, and it was just us, just like, how would life be? Just talking about how would life be without Jay? Like, this wasn't real. Like, it just seemed like it was so unreal. The following week, or 2 weeks later for Christmas, we went to Colorado. We went on his Make-A-Wish. We were like expediting everything. We stayed up there for a week. We came home. 2 days later, the Ryan Callahan Foundation, they sent us to Disney. So we were out there for 3, 4, 5 days, I think. Came home, and I'm like, okay, we're ready to fight. Let's do this. In January of 2019, the cancer spread to his spine. And he kept saying, my back hurts. So he was put on all these different medications to the point where, like, they thought he was getting rebound headaches. I mean, he was on 100 milligrams of methadone. Like, I can't even think right now of all the different meds. Morphine, they were pumping him with morphine. They were giving him the fentanyl patch, just different things that you would give an adult. And Jay was just like, Mom, I'm in pain. I'm in pain. And I remember in February, we found out that he had 3 tumors in his brain. At that point, they're like, there's nothing we can do. I said, oh, no, we're still fighting. Jay's not giving up. We're going to keep fighting. We did palliative radiation. We did 12 cycles of that. Continued. We tried chemo pills. Didn't work out. Then in March, I flew up to Boston. March 4th, I flew up to Boston. We were seen by Dana-Farber Children's Hospital, 2 of the top osteosarcoma doctors nationwide. And they were like, okay, well, we have one trial right now with Jay's ANC, and his platelet count and his hemoglobin have to be at a certain point, even though for them it was not a big deal. It was like, I think it was like 200 and like a 6. Jay was at 0. Like, he would not go past 1. So we waited and waited, and I don't know. I don't even know how to explain that. We came home, and I remember on our flight home, Jayden saying, Mom, I can't feel my legs. I'm like, Jay, I know, we're on a small airplane. Like, there's a million people. And he said, no, Mom, this isn't funny. I can't feel my legs. But again, Jay played a lot. Like, he was just walking. Like, we toured Boston like we were, having fun. We weren't there for like a medical trip. When we landed in Tampa, Jay was completely paralyzed. It took 3 of the guys, the workers, to come pick my son up. And put him on the wheelchair, and I was like, Jay, stop playing. He's like, Mom, I can't. And I was angry. I remember like just saying, like, stop, don't touch him. Like, he's playing, like, it's fine. And they're like, man, we need to get off the plane so we can get your son. And I'm like, but he's joking. And he wasn't. The next day, took him back to Johns Hopkins, and he was completely paralyzed at that point. I mean, from his neck down, from his shoulders down. That was March. I remember we did 10 more cycles of palliative radiation. We tried another chemo pill, but that was just making everything worse. I mean, he was spitting up blood clots. It was just speeding up everything. So we're like, all right, at this point, I'm like, no, I still need to go. We need to find other options. And Jay kept saying, Mom, I'm going to die. Like, let's talk about this. I'm like, I will not talk about this. And he's like, let's just make memories. I'm like, no, Jayden, I don't want to make memories. I want to go and keep fighting. And I just remember, I don't want to cry, but I remember him saying, like, we have to talk about this. So he wrote everything out, what he wanted to do. We sat down, my 2 daughters and him, and it wasn't funny. But at this point, he's like, okay, I want to be buried. And I remember my oldest daughter, she was like, Jayden, if you get buried, there's maggots in the ground. And I'm like, this is a serious conversation. He's like, never mind, I don't want to be buried. I want to be cremated. And I'm like, we're supposed to be having this. I'm crying, and they're goofing off. I'm like, this isn't funny. This isn't something that a 14-year-old child should be talking about. And he's like, let's go make memories. So I contacted MIB, which is Make It Better for Osteosarcoma. It's a strictly osteosarcoma non-for-profit. And they sent us on our last final family vacation. So in June, we went back to Disney. We stayed at Give Kids the World, and we spent an entire week at every theme park. Like, we didn't live in Florida for the last 14 years of our life. Like, we were tourists. We went everywhere you could think of. The museum, we went to the aquarium. I mean, like, we had never lived here with SeaWorld, Universal. We had so much fun. And I just remember Jayden buying every single thing that he would look at something and say, okay, let's buy it. Okay, that we're buying it. To the point where we all had to buy book bags just to put his souvenirs in. And he was like, I don't know why everyone's, tired. And we all had book bags and he's in the wheelchair. And he just did it he was so happy. He was like, okay, this is our last family vacation and I'll be fine. And I'm going to die, guys. I'm going to be here for my birthday and I'm going to die. And I just remember saying, James, stop it. Like, you're fine. Like, he had his ups and downs. Like, 1 minute, if you would look at him, you'd be like, oh, okay, he looks like he's getting better. And then there were days where, because he was paralyzed, they had to put a catheter in, and you could see like the pain and just everything that he was going through. Just normal kid, like, it just wasn't fair. I don't even have words for that part. But I remember in August, well, actually, let me back up a little bit. At the end of June, he asked one of his oncologists, he said, how much time do you think I have left? And she said, well, I'm not going to tell you that I can't. Like, I don't know. And she's like, he asked her, he's like, will I be here for my birthday? And she said, well, I don't know. I'm not God. Because that was Jay's big thing. Like, you're not God. You can't tell me when I'm going to die or what I'm going to do. And I remember her saying, she's like, but the way, just on paper, like the way your chart looks, she's like, you're not doing too well. She's like, why don't you celebrate your birthday? And he said, well, I am in October. And she said, well, you asked for my opinion. And I remember Dr. Vishnu, Jayden loved Dr. Vishnu. So they were joking around and I'm crying and they're like goofing off. And I'm like, I can't handle this. So the end of August, on August 30th, 31st, and September 1st, Jay, and I'll never forget this, Jay, he was never disrespectful to me. Like, he was a mama's boy. Like, he would fight everybody else, argue with everybody in the world, but he never once, I mean, of course, he would walk away and say slick things. All my kids are like me. They like to have the last word. But Jay never, ever in his 14 years ever was disrespectful. And I remember that entire weekend, he was so mean to me, like, to the point where I was like, Jay, I'm just going to punch you. Like, one time, I don't care if you're paralyzed. I'm just going to backhand you. And he's like, he was so mean. And on September 1st, I woke up, I was in a good mood. I'm like, are we going to have a good day? He's like, get out. I don't love you. I hate you. And I was just like, I was so taken back that I took my daughters. I'm like, we're just going to leave the house for a little bit. He wants to spend time with his dad. And I just remember crying, like, he's never mean to me. Like, what did I do? What did I say? And then I get a call from his dad, and he said, so Jay's breathing funny. And I said, okay, give him an asthma treatment. Again, he was fine when I left. And he said, no, something's not right. I said, all right, well, I'll be home soon. And then I said, girls, let's just go. I was at a friend's house, hanging out with them. And I said, let's just go. So we're only down the road, but it was pouring rain. And I was like, something's not right. It doesn't sit well with me. So I called him back and I'm like, is Jayden okay? And he said, he's zoning out. He's not breathing. I said, call 911. I'll be home in 10 minutes. By the time I got home, a couple minutes later, the paramedics walk in. And I remember them saying that Jay's blood pressure was extremely low. Low to anybody, yes. But for us, seeing the bottom number at like 20 was not a big deal because he's on so many medications. It was normal for him. And the paramedics, they said, we can't legally leave him here. We have to take him. So I said, okay, well, Jay, let's just go. And he argued, like, he was so mad. He was arguing with his sister. I'm like, Zakaria, get Jayden. He's not listening to me. He kept saying, don't touch me, Mom. You don't love me. And I was like, why is he being so mean? We get in the ambulance. They close the door. And I tell you, I promise, Jay stopped breathing. They completely flatlined. And I'm like, your machine is wrong. Like, he was just talking, like, he's fine. And they try to keep him up. They said, well, we can't go to Johns Hopkins. We have to reroute and go to the local hospital in Tampa. And I said, but they don't know they don't know any of Jayden's records. Like, they don't know, like, what to do. And they said, we're not making it over the bridge. I said, okay. So we get into the ER. Jay's fine again. Like, he, like, snapped out of this flat line. Like, he started breathing again. He was talking. But still, he was really zoned out, and then he stopped breathing again. So they rushed him upstairs to the ICU. And then we were up there, and they told me he had 24 hours to live. And I said, no, that's impossible. Jay said he would be here for his birthday. Like, I'm not about to have my last conversation with my son, him saying he hates me. I'm like, no. They said, Mom, you're in denial. And I said, no, you don't know my God, and you don't know my son. And I remember the doctors just being like, you're really like weird. Like, I remember they're just like, no, you're just in denial. You need to call somebody to be here with you. So I called my entire family, you know, my 3 kids, and at the time my husband, and I said, you guys need to come say goodbye to Jay. And so we had so many people coming in and out unannounced to the ICU, like just so many people that they actually moved us from upstairs to their cancer floor. And I said, well, these people don't know Jay's story. Like, I have Jay's records and I have them on my phone, but they don't know what medication he needs. They don't know what he likes. And so I just remember the doctor, the oncology team there. At first, they were kind of standoffish, and they were just like, well, he's going to die. So what do you need us to do? And I said, well, save him. What do you mean? And I kept telling them, you don't know Jayden. And on September 7th, after they told me on September 1st, they had 24 hours, this kid opened his eyes, started talking. And I remember just like, okay, now I'm losing my mind. I've been in the hospital. Like, I'm hearing things. And he said, Mom. And I went over to him and he said, I'm really sorry. And I said, sorry for what, baby? You were like in a coma. And he said, I was mean to you. And I said, well, it's okay, baby. He goes, the only reason I was mean to you was because I thought I was going to die. And I didn't want you to see me die. He said, the only way that I could get you to leave me alone was to be mean to you. He's like, and you still didn't leave me alone. I said, well, because you're not dying without me. Like, you're not dying. Like, we're fine. And he said, no, I'm going to die, Mom. And he kept like putting his hands on my cheeks. And he said, I'm going to die on my birthday. I just want you to prepare yourself. And again, he had everything written out. His funeral, the pastor, he hand selected the pastor, the church, everything. I didn't have to do anything. The colors and but so we were at the hospital for 37 days. He would have extremely great days where he's like, oh, I want a cheeseburger. I want Chick-fil-A. I want everything you could think, fresh chocolate pudding. And then there would be days where you could see like his mind, his mental state wasn't there. Like, he would tell the nurses, like, my mom is taunting me. She won't feed me as I'm feeding him chocolate pudding. Like, he got really bad. And then on October 6th, which is his birthday, at around 1 a.m., his breathing became very shallow. And I called everyone that he wanted, because again, he wrote everything out. Everyone that he wanted to see, that he had written on this piece of paper, I called and I said, you need to be at the hospital. He doesn't have that much longer. He waited for everybody. And then, so when his heartbeat really started slowing down, the people who just came to see him, they stepped out of the room, and the people that he wanted in the room, they were there. And I remember holding him, and he had in my arms, his head was on my arm, and I whispered into his ears. He had one last wish, and his last wish was for me to be happy. Like, I was married at that point for 20 years, well, 17, and with his father for 20. And he said, back in February, he said, I need you to promise me one thing, that you'll be happy and you'll find someone. I'm like, Jayden, no, like, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Like, I was, and I whispered in his ear, because he was really like struggling. And I'm like, what is he holding on to? At that point, I was so angry with God. Like, just take him. Like, what do you, like, take him already. Like, you're making him suffer. And I whispered in his ears, and I said, Jay, I promise I'll do exactly what you said. I will be happy. I'll leave your dad. And as soon as those words left my mouth, he flatlined. So he took his last breath at 1:53 p.m. on his 15th birthday. So, and that's our story. I mean, I did leave a lot of stuff out, so I'm trying to, but that was the main thing.
Well, Alicia, it's a heartbreaking story. Beautiful though. I mean, it just, his will and his mentality of still fighting, of fighting and being a warrior that he was and he continues to be. I mean, this is we were talking about it off camera, of how this is a group that none of us wanted to be a part of, and we're here, but we're here to help each other out. And if you can answer this, I just have a couple of questions. And if you don't feel like answering, that's perfectly fine. But as far as his siblings, how has that, obviously it's affected them. um and we do have a lot of other parents that have lost a child, that have other children that are going through it,
Mhm.
and perhaps they don't know how to handle the situation with them. How has that affected them, and what has helped them and what hasn't helped them?
It's definitely been a struggle. So both my sons are 6 years apart. Both my daughters are 6 years apart, and then the two in the middle, Sakaria and Jay, were 16 months apart. So they were the closest. So I mean, if you saw Jay, you saw Sakaria. Not to say that the other two weren't around, but they were like the favorites, each other's favorites. So it was a hard hit. I think for my older son, because when Jay relapsed, he ended up moving out. 'Cause again, he's an adult. He's in his 20s. But I think he lives with a lot of regret that he wasn't there. He didn't get to see everything behind closed doors, because at that point he was like, I can't see my brother go through this again. And Jayden went through a lot. I mean, there's a lot I didn't say again. So just imagine a kid who was an amazing soccer player to become in a vegetative state. So he expresses himself through his music. Um, my little one, she's very angry. Like she's very like sarcastic. Like and she doesn't mean to be, but like if you talk to her, she'll say comments like, "Well, I'm having a bad day. I'm sorry, my brother died," or so she doesn't know how to channel that out. And then for Sakaria, it's just been really hard. It's been very hard. I mean, she has a lot of separation anxiety. As do I. But I think with her, it's just like everyone's gonna die. Like, what if I'm not there? Or we go back to that day. Like, what if we didn't leave when Jay was angry? Like, would this have turned out different? I don't know. So I just think it's hard. I haven't found anything that has helped us because we're still going through it. It's just
Right.
I don't know. Like we don't have an outlet. So
And it's something that that we're going to be going through for the rest of our
mhm,
lives. We're going to have our good days and we're going to have our bad days. And one thing that I've learned for myself, and that I've told other parents when they ask me for advice, is that I tell them it's okay to be not okay. It's
mhm,
okay to have all these feelings, to have anger, to have questions, because a part of our heart is no longer here with us physically. We
mhm.
know where our children are, and we know that one day we will see them again, and for eternity in paradise. But yet we're living in the now, and
Yeah.
we don't have them here physically with us. um well, I again, if you've seen my episodes, I always do ask parents, what advice, and as broken as we are, and I've been through this situation so much, there's days that I am just buried in depression, but
Mhm.
somehow a parent will give me a call and they need words of encouragement. And here I am, encouraging. But throughout that, I encourage myself as well. So I just wanted to ask you, what advice would you give other parents that are going through the same situation that both you and I are going through? And what advice would you give to those parents that have perfectly healthy children?
Well, for the families that have perfectly healthy children, I just never take life for granted. I mean, just cherish your children, cherish every moment. I was so caught up in working and paying bills and, providing for my family and giving them everything that they could, that now it's like Jay's not here. And I think about, what if I would have continued to work? There's parents that I know that work throughout their treatment, their child's treatment. I'm like, I would have missed all that. So God provided for my family. I mean, I didn't work for almost 3 years and everything was paid for. And I cherish all the long talks I had with Jay, or him being in the hospital. And I'm like, okay, I'm just sitting here while he's playing his video games, but just cherish that time, because you can always find another job. You can always do everything, whatever else, pay bills. There, it's always going to be there. But your children, I mean, they'll grow up. But like in our situation, we have to just remember them in the past, like how they were. Like I'll never know what Jayden would be like as an adult, or like I'll never see my son graduate or drive a car, have a girlfriend, or get married, start a family. So for those that have lost a child, I would just say ask for help. That's my biggest downfall. I don't like asking people for help, because I'm the one that always helps people. So it's hard for me to accept help. And um, I just struggle with that. So it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to be angry. That's one thing society doesn't allow. Like they want to fix you. If you're having a bad day or you're sad, let's not talk about it. Let's be great. Let's be happy. But like you have to be angry sometimes. Like you just have to be sad sometimes. You can't, it's not like losing, I don't know. I mean, I've lost family, I've lost a dog, I've had a lot of loss in my life, but that's nothing compared to losing your child. I think that's my opinion.
Right. It's okay to not be okay. And one thing I learned from Tracy in the retreat is that it's okay to be vulnerable as well. It's okay to
Mhm.
to have that vulnerability and to be able to express how you feel and not suppress it, because it can come back and 10 times worse than how it was initially. Um, and I know we were also talking, and I know in your personal Facebook page, with you had a live about a week or two ago, which is kind of cool. But you also mentioned to me that you want to start a YouTube channel as well.
Mhm.
And I don't know how far you are in the works with that, but I just want to let you know that we can partner up here with the Gold Corner,
Thank you.
and we can definitely help you out any way possible that we can. Do you have any other organizations that you either currently are helping or that have helped you, or just any other organizations that you're associated with?
Yes, so Jayden wrote everything down for me. The one thing, he had four organizations that he made me promise I would always continue researching, fundraising for. So the first one is the Children's Cancer Center. That's a local organization. They helped us the entire treatment. I mean, financially, Christmas, you name it, they were there. The NPCF, which is the National Pediatric Cancer Foundation, that's a nationwide organization, but the main headquarters is here in Tampa. They do a lot of research. So their main focus is they do help families, but their main goal is research, like funding research. And now since Jay passed, I realized they came out with like 3 or 4 osteosarcoma trials. So like that's anytime I fundraise, I put it into the osteosarcoma. That the other one is MIB, that Make It Better for Osteosarcoma. It's again strictly for osteosarcoma. Again, that's something that's there's not a lot of organizations for osteosarcoma. That's one of the cancers that's not really out there, if you will. So they do a lot for siblings, for the child, the warrior, the family. So they do mission trips, which is they sent us on our final vacation, and then Fight for Gold was one of the last one. Jayden and Kaylin were really good friends. They were like best friends. She's older, but she did a lot for our family through treatment. She helped with Christmas, financially, with bills. So we just actually for Jayden's 1 year and his 1 year in heaven / 16th birthday, we did a huge drive, and people from everywhere donated Christmas gifts, and I donated them to her so she can pass out for, to kids with cancer.
Well, there you have it. And if you give me all that information and all those links, I'll go ahead and put them here in the description so people can reach out to them, and people can reach out to you if they have any other questions or not. And I just wanted to share a funny story with our viewers here that we had been talking about and even laughing about. So both Alicia and myself were a part of this Chase the Victory retreat. Not on the same retreat. She went on the one in February, as I mentioned before she started her story, and I went for the one in spring break. But initially, at the beginning of the year, when Kiki got our information, it said, Alicia was divorced, and I put in my information as well, and I'm divorced. And there's really not a lot of Ojedas out there. There's really not a lot of us. And especially, I think Alicia's probably the first Ojeda I know that has a child that's gone through the same thing. So when Kiki first got that application, she thought that she had gotten both mom and dad
Mm-hmm.
together. And she's like, oh my God, I have, both exes trying to, be here in the retreat. And now that I know a little bit, I think even when you went in February, she was still kind of iffy whether I was your ex-husband or not, that all was. So, we laugh about it now. And we laughed about it with Kiki. We were on a Zoom call last week, the parents that have been there. And I just thought that was funny. So that's how this all kind of came about. But, Alicia and I really did not know each other. I mean, we had heard about each other. She heard my daughter's story. I heard her son's story. But this is actually the first time we interact like this. I thought that was
Mhm.
pretty cool, and I wanted to share that with our viewers. Well, Alicia, before we finish the interview, is there anything that you want to leave us with?
No, I mean you can follow my son's journey. It's hashtag Team Beans. You'll find all of his pictures. You'll be able to see just different stages of his life. So it's hashtag Team Beans, BEANZ.
Do you have a Facebook page just for that, or
Mhm.
just a
Well,
hashtag?
I did create one. I can't do it. I tried, but it's too hard.
It's perfectly understandable. I mean, it took me a long time after Mia passed to even talk about it, to even and do anything about it. But with you wanting to do this YouTube channel, I think that's an amazing idea, and that's
Mhm.
not only a way to keep our children's legacy alive, but to also be helping other parents that are going through the same thing or that could potentially go through the same thing. And we were chosen. God chose us. Perhaps when our children were going through the battle, we did not know why, but now it's starting to clear up and know why. And even though we do miss our children like crazy, because we do, we have we have an obligation now, and we have an obligation to be a voice for these children, and we have an obligation to be there for other parents that have gone through the same thing, because that's what we're here for. So thank you, everybody, to all our viewers. Alicia, thank you so much. Thank you really
Thank
for
you.
being a part of this, for being a part of the Gold Corner family now. And like I said, we'll be working alongside each other, and once you're ready to do your YouTube channel again, I'd be more than happy to help you with that. So thank you so
Thank
much for
you.
that. And to all our viewers, I just again wanted to say thank you so much for taking your time out of your busy Sunday to listen to these stories. And these are stories that we what I wanted to do is to create this platform, not only to keep our children's legacy memory alive, but just so you can know the reality of what childhood cancer is. And the viewers that have gone through it or are currently going through it, you know how awful it is. And for the ones that have not gone through this, I always tell them, consider yourself being blessed, but this is what we have gone through it, and we have made a pact to do something about it. So thank you so much for taking time and listening to these stories. If you still haven't done so, hit the little gold ribbon here in the corner. That'll subscribe you to the channel and listen to the stories that have been featured throughout season one, and now halfway through season two. And you can also visit our official nonprofit organization page at thegoldcorner.org. We have a lot of great things coming up. So thank you so much once again for tuning in. And this is the Gold Corner. This is who we are. We are a broken family, but we're broken together. Remember to live each day to its fullest, because tomorrow is not promised. And just hold on a little while longer, because we're almost home. God bless you, and we'll see you next week.